really is, I think, important to regain credibility. And the only way to do that, and the thing that I stand on, is the data speaks for itself. Look at the data. And if the data shows that that some preconceived idea was not correct, then you toss it and you go with the data. You don't go with the theory. Right now, what's happening is the CO2 people are saying, we know what causes climate change, it's CO2, and we're not going to consider anything that is opposed to that. In other words, the conclusion precedes the data and supersedes the data. So if the data doesn't match their conclusion, then the data must be wrong. Well, that's not science. That's politics. What we need to do is to get back to the idea that you go where the data takes you.
Who are the biggest opposers of your work? What do people say about you on the internet, on Google? What are the attacks on you about?
Well, every time I publish something, publish data, what I think doesn't matter. It's that data that's important. When I publish data that suggests that CO2 is not the cause of what we're seeing in climate change, and every time I suggest that these are natural, reoccurring climate changes that have been going on for thousands of years, there are a lot of CO2-related blogs that immediately call me names and issue personal insults. They never refute the data. And the idea is, well, you don't. If you can't refute the data, then you try to discredit the messenger. And so you will see blogs calling me an idiot and all kinds of personal insults, which of course is not very scientific. And most of the people who are doing this aren't even scientists, although there are some scientists who will do that. For example, James Hansen, the head of NASA, has once suggested that people who disagree with him that CO2 is causing climate change, people like me, ought to go to jail for the rest of their lives as climate criminals. That's not science.
How do scientists do their jobs under this type of an atmosphere? No pun intended.
Well, I think that they work in certain areas of specialty, and they try to find out the truth about what's going on. And the difference is between those scientists who are objective, are saying, let's look at the data and let's go where the data takes us, as opposed to people who are now driven largely by money, unfortunately, who say, well, if I come to this conclusion, I'll have an open spigot of research funds of millions of dollars for the rest of my life, and I'll get promoted and so on. And so there's a strong bias there. And if they then do the other way around, they say, well, we know what the conclusion is. And you will see this. You'll see scientists say this, that the conclusion is now without possibility of change. And since we know what the conclusion is, any data to the contrary must be wrong. And those people are doing that right now. They're putting out all kinds of claims, and every time there is data that comes out that suggests that CO2 has nothing to do with significant climate change, then they will put out some outrageous thing, such as, the really cold winters that we're having now all over the world, both hemispheres, is caused by global warming.
Crazy
thing like that. And that's not science.
That's really lunacy.
Yeah, it's crazy.
You do research now full time, correct?
That's right.
How do you fund what you do? Because research is usually expensive.
In some cases, I have grants from government agencies. Most of that now has pretty much dried up because I am identified as a so-called climate skeptic or global warming skeptic, and therefore I would have no possibility, for example, of getting funding from the National Science Foundation. Now, the National Science Foundation funded my research for about 40 years, and I had something like 8 National Science Foundation grants. Nowadays, I wouldn't stand a chance of getting a grant because the people who are in control of the spending at NSF are the CO2 dogmatists who would not think of funding anything that could possibly cast doubt on CO2. So the bottom line is the kind of research that I'm doing now is relatively inexpensive, and I essentially fund it myself. It doesn't take a lot of money. Most of the data that I use is already available, and so it's a matter of putting the data together and see what it means, and also using data that are produced by other agencies, by other scientists, and that sort of thing. So I don't need a huge, big research grant in order to do what I do.
That's good. Well, I just want to thank you for being a guest on the show and tell you how much we appreciate your perspective. I don't think I've interviewed a geologist so far. You've been doing this for 50 years. That's really a huge commitment.
Thank you for the kind words. And my parting statement would be, don't believe the rhetoric. Look at the data. And you don't have to be a rocket scientist to look at the data and make up your own mind. And if you look at the data, I think it's very clear what's happening, what's going on, and whether or not we're headed for doom from warming or cooling. Time will tell. We'll know. For example, we'll know in another 10 years whether my prediction was right or not, whether we are in fact cooling. So my parting statement would be simply look at the data and decide for yourself. Don't believe anything you read or hear on TV or the news media.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have been talking with, learning from, and listening to Dr. Don Easterbrook, who has been studying geology, practicing geology for 50 years, focused on ancient and modern climate change and abrupt climate change, looking at glaciers and ice core analysis. And what he says is the past in climate change is the key to the future. Thank you so much, Don, and we hope you join us again in the future.
Thank you. Be happy to.
Thank you.